Hello, I'm Yumi Kuwana, founder and president of Global Citizens Initiative. In this increasingly digitized and interconnected world, international trade, world population, and student exchanges have hit record highs. The world has become more complex and interdependent. Yet, dominant educational models still lag behind this globalization trend. Since 2012, we've been developing an educational method, platform, and community to equip young global citizens with the mindset, skills, and resources necessary to be effective and ethical global leaders. It is our hope to nurture our next generation of responsible and globally minded youth who are willing to listen to multiple perspectives, understand various cultures, and possess strong moral character. We need leaders who will break down barriers and build up trust rather than build up walls. It is no longer a privilege to be a global citizen, but a necessity in order to survive and thrive moving forward in the 21st century. GCI's unique holistic approach and ethos set us apart. In the video that follows, we break down the GCI method for you into three main components: discussion-based learning, design thinking, and human connectivity. Within these components, there are common threads and themes you'll notice, such as engagement, ethics, and excellence. The most important being ethics, which is at the core of the GCI method and critical to the development of our fellows as agents of positive change. This video focuses on the academic rigors of developing global citizens, but keep in mind that the classroom education is also an introduction to a global community and mindset that will comprehensively and continuously support their lifelong engagement as social leaders. Our vision is a global community where individuals embrace both their own and others' unique stories and cultures while they design and implement solutions to global issues that transcend social, economic, and political boundaries. This will allow over 7 billion people to coexist peacefully on this planet.
The GCI discussion-based pedagogy and philosophy aims to nurture critical thinking and exposure to a wide range of perspectives through discussion-based learning. This method convenes 12 to 14 students and a teacher around an oval table. The function of the teacher at the table is to be an advocate for the process being the conversation, the collaborative inquiry of an assignment. A teacher speaks only sparingly at the table. It is a shift from a teacher-centric process to student-centered learning, and that difference is profound. Once the students learn they have control over what happens to them in the classroom, they gain a deeper commitment to their own education. It also hones each student's ability to listen, collaborate, and provide constructive criticism in a diplomatic manner. A unique aspect of the program is that prior to the classroom sessions at the Global Citizens Youth Summit, a faculty member delivers a thought-provoking opening session called a plenary related to the daily theme of engagement, ethics, or excellence. The plenary session is a deep look into a real-life story. The content is unrelated to assigned readings, but the theme of which may serve as further scaffolding for future thought and conversation. After the session, students break into their smaller classroom groups and proceed with their roundtable discussion. One point to note is that the discussion-based learning of the GCI experience is a departure from the Socratic dialogue methodology. With the Socratic method, it is assumed that the teacher has the answer. But with the discussion-based learning, the students pose the question and discover answers together through a more personal and broader range of understandings and applications. In the next section of the video, Ms. Emer Page joins Ms. Molly Simmons for a conversation on discussion-based learning following 2 class observations.
Emer, thank you so much for letting me sit in on your 2 classes this morning.
You're welcome, Molly. It was great to have you there, and I'm looking forward to the chance to chat through how the classes went.
I loved how you started the entire class by, instead of jumping right into the material, kind of resettling the students into their new groups, kind of calming the energy after the plenary. With the rectangular tables we have here, there's the obvious issue of being able to see each other's eyes. So just taking the time to move back
So we're going to make a start, but we're going to make a start by having a look around, and I think it's actually going to be Marius and Gianna and I who have the biggest job here to figure out that we have sight lines in the middle of the tables to everyone, and if we don't, to ask the people around us to pull in, pull out slightly, just making sure that you can make your eye contact with the whole table.
You know, really I feel like anything that settles students into the transition between the pre-class and the class is helpful. And I really was deliberately trying to get them to just sort of think consciously, can I see everyone? Because I want to see everyone, because this is going to be a marker of how we have our discussion together. Yeah, that was just the very first activity, but framing it and figuring out how everyone can see everyone was a deliberate move,
And then taking time to do a quick exercise. I think one of the frames you were talking about awareness, and in the second class you said an electric level of awareness, right? So that it's that reinforcement of the group conversation, and they did really well on the number countdown.
They were very pleased with themselves. So students knew that there was something they needed to say, and they actually had what they needed to say, but what they didn't have is the order. So they couldn't just do it around the room,
right?
Because that would have been way too easy. They had to really be aware of one another's bodies. And if two students spoke at the same time, they started again. Yesterday's exercise took us quite a while to get through.
I wondered.
We did get through it in both classes, so they had that sense of achievement. Maybe there was progress from yesterday. Maybe it was a simpler task. It was shorter. But also that was their last day together doing classes in this way, so I think they were really eager to demonstrate to each other that they could do this thing. So they both got it. It was really nice to see. They just had that little moment of levity as well before we moved into the text.
If you remember, last class we started with our alphabet game. We're going to do something along those lines to start off with today, but this time it's going to be a countdown, which means each of you is only going to get one number, right? So you can't finish it off. We're going to have to make sure we have all 14 voices. If you're not...
You're relieving the students at the beginning of the class from responsibility of thinking up their own words to say. You're giving them, here's your script. Your script is the line of poetry, or your script is the letter of the alphabet or the number. And what you're doing is you're practicing just getting your voice into the mix and having people be aware of where you are in the discussion group. Yeah, I think it's helpful to have them. Again, we're still talking about the opening moments, just the transition here.
And if we can't, we'll start again at 14. But if we do start again, we'll start with a different person. We're not keeping the same order.
14.
13.
12.
11.
10.
9.
8.
7.
6.
5.
4.
3.
2. 1.
Nicely done, guys. So that electric level of awareness of who hasn't spoken yet, who do we need to make space for at the table, let's try to keep some sense of that in the class as we go, because we were hyper conscious of there's a voice that's going to come from an area of the table that we haven't heard from yet, right? So let's see if we can keep some sense of that while also allowing ourselves, of course, to let the conversation flow. The other thing that we're going to do at the beginning of the class, which we didn't do yesterday, is you're just going to get into pairs for a few minutes. I want you to think of something that you would like to bring to the group discussion. What you're going to do is figure out, okay, what in this, or what idea that this generates for us, do we want to hear other people wrestle with? So you're coming up with a discussion question.
So I think it was just, in general, it was the first 5 minutes maybe of class. They come in, they focus, they know what they're doing, the text is open, and then you paired them up and had them go. And those things are necessary to set the expectation that we want them to use the text.
Yeah, you really want them backing up their ideas with evidence. Otherwise, it all just becomes, well, I believe, or in my opinion, and you don't really...
People think,
yes. Yeah. It becomes too general. Yeah. But once you model for them across disciplines, rooting their ideas in evidence, then you start having students build up an awareness of how to make a persuasive argument.
Some schools and some teachers are asked continuously to check for understandings of learning, right? How do you know that your students are learning?
Mm-hmm.
And in discussion-based learning, that's a little bit harder to judge. And yet I find the easiest way to know if a student has done the reading is whether or not they can go to the text with their comments and evidence,
Mm-hmm.
or if they stay only in their own opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So I find, as a teacher, once you get that practice of hearing the types of comments students make, you get a sense of how they've interacted with the text, or for that matter, if they've done the reading.
Yeah. And then the other thing that comes into it, which we do need to gauge dependent upon the group of students in front of us, is what is an appropriate reading length?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we have to, and there's no right answer to that. It depends on the difficulty of the material, the types of students, the amount of preparation time, the preparation expectations, the length of the discussion that they're
Mm-hmm.
going to have. But that's a hard question.
If we want them to do well, we need them to have the time and preparation to do
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So that's all kind of frame and
Setup.
setup.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you thought about going into these classes that we haven't touched on?
Oh, well, one of the things that I did try to do with the students in general before we even got into the classroom was give them a kind of range of the kinds of interjections, the types of things they might find themselves doing at the table. So that was, I hope, helpful for some who had not had experience in a discussion-based classroom. So they didn't feel that everything had to be a statement of
Right.
some major synthesis of ideas that they had come across in the text. They could introduce a new topic, they could make a connection with a speaker, a previous reading, or something that it reminded of them about in their own experience, which I'll come back to. This is, I think, particular
Right.
to this kind of
Yeah.
situation that we're in right now. They could affirm something another student had said. They could challenge something another student had said, although they needed to do that in such a way that it didn't undermine the self-confidence of that other student. They could ask a student for more information on something that they'd said. They could ask them to repeat a question, or they could help clarify something. They could make a citation or a textual comment, or they could do some summarizing. They could begin to attempt to synthesize two ideas and say, what so-and-so has said reminds me of this other thing. Are these two strands connected?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are many other types of productive intervention or interjections that students could make in a discussion. I also talked with them about the kinds of behaviours that might derail us. So on that I had students, if their tone was dismissive, it was going to cause other students to be wary of entering. It would feel like an unsafe space.
Mm-hmm.
If the comments that they made were completely unconnected to anything else,
Mm-hmm.
that's a great way to derail things. If their tone was combative, so if in challenging someone else's idea they became argumentative, combative, it becomes a back and forth between students, that's not particularly helpful. They could make a comment which is unsupported by the text or is just not related to the evidence in front of them. And then the other thing I was thinking was if they came up with an idea and they were digging their heels and they were unwavering in the way they put forward their determination, and they didn't let the other students' interjections mold their belief. All those can be ways in which the group gets stuck, derailed, or we sort of descend into something that is not collaborative meaning making. And then the final thing that I told the students about, and this was actually after talking with you and John, the other teachers in the program, was about silence, about owning silence, and about trying to discern, is this silence a silence because we've been struck deeply by something someone
Right.
has said and we need some time to sit with it and think about it? Is it a silence because we're doing some processing in our head about everything that's happened and we've maybe encountered a new idea? Or is it a silence because maybe we've run out of steam, we're ready to move on? And whose responsibility is it in a discussion-based class to move on from a silence? And whoever's responsibility it is, I would argue strongly that it's not the teachers.
Right.
Particularly not in the early days, because if the teacher is the one to break a silence, then that becomes the role the students expect the teachers to take. So a teacher who is perfectly happy sitting in a silence where the students become increasingly uncomfortable is going to do better than a teacher who starts to squirm and feel, I must break this. And if you sit long enough, one of the students will come up with something.
I think we may never have a very vivid solution of this exact solution was implemented is going to reap the greatest effect.
Yeah, basically in agreement with that. I think the best way of being compassionate towards homeless people is to have a long-term support system.
Yeah, the other thing which I think I'm pretty sure you were picking up on was I was very aware of body language of some of those quieter students and trying to ask the other students, had they noticed a student trying to get in who was a little quieter? And so what you need to have really, ideally, is the body language of engagement, not the body language of closed off you and the text, not the disengagement from the table, but there's something that is a listening attitude that you want to see the kids in, and can be very helpful, specific feedback to give to a student.
Absolutely.
To say to them, I noticed that you're pulling back from the table, or I noticed that your tunnel vision on the text, and what I need you to be is looking around, and actually charge them with, next class, I want you to invite 2 to 3 quieter students. I don't want you to put them on the spot. I only want you to invite them if they've knocked the door, if they've leant in, if they've opened their mouths, but I want you hyper aware. What was the phrase I had?
Electric level of awareness.
An electric level of awareness.
Yeah, but that is
the body
it, right?
language of
where
the others.
you know what's going on with everyone. Well, and there's a investment in everyone when you do that. There's an investment in the process. I wrote down your interventions, and some of them I just included the beginning of the intervention and then ... So I'll let you know. So you framed it with the sight lines and the numbers and opening of the text and the pairing, and then you started with who would like to begin, and then anyone else. Do you want to say a little bit more about they are fearful of, and you clarified someone's point, that it's contagious was a kind of like a laughing moment, right? Like you were talking about fear. I think that is what Mako was saying about passivity. You were bringing her point back in. If we were to summarize what we've heard so far, and Masa, can you reiterate your question? Your comment shows us that when we start on one topic, we tag on all these other strings that begin to unfold. So what do we understand about empathy then? There was another, you made kind of like it was a joking comment, like, is the purpose to make everyone homeless so we understand, and that was laughter. So how do you define sympathy? What's the difference? And then you had Wumi, you kind of spoke just to her and you had her look up the definitions. You had said, what do you want us to do, Sydney? And then you kind of ended it. You had asked the question, what made you want to do this summit?
Yeah.
Right, was your last way to get other voices in to the conversation, and the final thing you said was, Carla, were you going to say something? Because I think you'd seen her going for it.
Yeah.
And then Carla, who had been listening all class and processing,
taking notes.
right, she makes the comments, if I don't act, who will?
Yeah.
And she didn't go on and on and on, she just said that and kind of looked around and sat back, and everyone was just kind of quiet. Like,
Well, couldn't that be a
yes.
slogan for this kind of summit? If I don't act,
right.
who will?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just loved that it just, in some ways, it put everyone in their place. It grounded everyone in the why are we here.
Hold this thing that people can say to the world.
Carla, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I guess I can just speak for myself. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I came here because if I don't take action, I don't know who else will. You know?
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end, unless anybody has a final pressing thought that they'll feel, I missed my opportunity. All right, thanks, guys.
A couple of the times you noticed that what I was trying to do was introduce a little levity.
Yes.
Like the students will say something, they're on the cusp of saying something that can be pretty funny, or it's easy to turn it into something pretty funny. And without it ever being at a student's expense, it's great when there's laughter in a classroom.
Empathy is the ability to see yourself, to place yourself in this person's shoes. That's the meaning of empathy to me. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe a way that we could promote empathy for homeless people
Is to make everybody homeless? Oh, no, sorry.
is to, tell their stories.
I think you could tell too, that's not what he meant to say, but that
Yes.
was sort of where he was going. So
Then
some
he
of
was able
those
to clarify.
laughters, like when you do that, I think it's a help. It's kind of like a lifeline to the kid too, to
Steer away
you
from...
see them struggling a little bit,
Yeah.
and it's a kind of kind support
Yeah.
too.
The other thing that I'll do, and I know that most of us do this, is I'll model a lack of understanding in order to permit them to demonstrate a lack of understanding.
Right.
I'll say, and I'm not being, it's not purely performative. I do mean it when I say, this is really complicated, I don't get it, can you help me? Which I think gives permission for the students, maybe not in quite that way, but to say, this is confusing.
That's a great intervention, is let's define this so we're all on the same page. And if we're not, that helps us to clarify that we're not. So I was keeping track of who had spoken. And I knew that there were two students who hadn't spoken yet. And there hadn't seemed to be space for them yet to do that. And so when you needed a task, when we had sympathy and empathy, and you're like, all right, we got to define these. And it was the same thing. I was like, we need a dictionary here. We need someone to do this.
Yeah.
And we'd taken their phones away, right? So I'm sure many of them thought the same thing, but they didn't know if they had permission to ask her to do that. And so you gave the task, gave the permission to...
I gave my phone.
Yeah, to the students who were engaged but hadn't been able to find a place for their voice
They can't
yet.
fend for themselves. They can't do anything. Like, we need to baby them. It's exactly what they don't want. It's like the whole thing with the Camp Hill movement. Whereas in, like, if you're treating disabled people as like, oh, we need to hear disabled people's stories to be able to empathize with them, like, I think it goes so much beyond that, because you're basically just babying them, like making them less than human.
And I was aware of it because I was watching the table, but I don't think everybody at the table even knew that happened, even though they were across from you. It was just quick, and you were like, look it up. And they were like, okay, they were on it.
Like the difference between sympathy and empathy is that sympathy is seeing the pair of shoes, and empathy is being in the pair of shoes.
Wumi's going to help us out here because I've just given her a thumb.
So, sympathy, according to Google, it says that it's the feeling of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune.
So you see that.
All right, now to empathy. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feeling of another.
Exactly.
Sympathy sounds more negative.
No, sympathy is more passive.
Yeah.
It's like you see what's going on.
It's just acknowledging
You
You
walk
see-
by the guy and you
yeah.
say, wow, that
You
really
see
sucks.
outside
and
the
you
window.
keep going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Empathy.
What was the definition of empathy again?
Empathy
Ability
is
to
the
understand.
ability to understand and share the feeling of another
So you're in
person.
someone's shoes.
So you share, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you
Sympathy
ask
is
me,
seeing.
And they had the task right there. And what I loved is when one of them started reading the definition, someone tried to kind of cut in, someone tried to interrupt, and she was like, nope, okay, and now, right? There was strength, there was assertiveness, and so I think she appreciated the task, and her voice was strong. It was a great entryway.
And the information that she gave us then
necessary.
sustained the next
Right.
I don't know how many minutes, but we ended up talking about the distinctions she'd drawn our attention to and using that for the next section of the discussion. But I think it's definitely worth, when you're having a discussion-based class, reminding the students that they do not need to channel their interventions through a central moderator in the form of the teacher. And the raising of hands is a way to use the teacher as moderator for who speaks next, for the order of speeches. So one of the things that happens very quickly in my classroom and in most of the classrooms that I encounter these days is that students are accustomed to speaking to one another and of speaking just kind of in whatever sequence works.
I also found the minute, often it's because the teacher or facilitator has kind of posed the first question. And so the first person to answer is the one they're looking at you and they raise their hand. And, when you say, you don't need to do that, you said, put that hand down, Dan, all of a sudden you really feel the kind of the democratic feel of the table. There isn't someone who's going to call you out. Like, you are all responsible for one another. You are responsible for letting whomever enter the conversation. And so that power shift, I think, is a really important change in just the feeling of the discussion around the table. That no one gets to be the one who decides who speaks next.
When in my early days of teaching at Exeter, an older colleague in a faculty meeting made the point that the power lies in the hands of the questioner. And I actually did tell the students that story, even though I don't specifically remember telling them not to raise their hands. But I was saying to them, there's a difference between the Socratic method, where the teacher puts forward a set of guided questions in order to bring the students to an understanding.
Right,
and
a preconceived or a
pre-decided
understanding.
Which can be a very valid way of teaching, but this isn't what we're doing here. This is where the students decide the direction of the material, and they decide the questions that are interesting ones to pose and answer. And the other piece that comes with that, as you say, if you pose the question, then the answer comes back to you. So what I try to do is have the beginning of class. My first question was, what did you say it was? Where do you want to begin?
Who would like to begin?
Who would like to begin?
Yeah.
I mean, that is not a question. Okay, somebody could say, me.
I do, right.
But that's not the beginning. So the beginning becomes something else. And hopefully what the students are doing then, if they're responding to the questioner, since the power then lies in the hands of that questioner, they're making eye contact with that questioner, because it's very difficult to have students not make eye contact with the teacher in the room if there's a teacher in the room.
Did anybody have something that came up there that they think would be a topic we should tackle in a larger group?
Yeah. So from talking to Kelsey, we came up with things society treats homeless people to be they're like a problem in society.
I found myself in my classes, and this is part of my own learning on how to be a good facilitator of these discussion-based classes, is when students were speaking and I can tell they're speaking to me, I actually either look down or look to see how other people are responding as opposed to looking directly at them, just to be aware or careful of what sort of affirmation they're looking for from me when I'm not judging them in that way. I'm not evaluating them in that way.
Yeah. So there are some strategies for that, but that's a real breakthrough when you see a student on day one who has been channeling everything through the teacher, and then a few days later you see them truly pulling in their peers and interested to see the expression on their peers' faces. And there is no problem at all with their peers nodding, and it's that you don't want the teacher to be the one that they're constantly looking for validation from. But if their peers are giving them those non-verbal cues that, wow, I'm really interested, that is in itself another kind of validation which they will end up seeking.
We had these 2 50-minute classes, and 50 minutes on for one discussion may sound like a lot, but I find at the end of almost every 50-minute conversation, you're ending in the middle of ideas. It's just, it builds and builds, and it's difficult to cleanly wrap up a discussion. And so the way that you did a little bit differently in both classes, but with 3 to 5 minutes left, when it seemed like there was a good time to intervene or pause, you asked kind of in both cases, first of all, let's reflect on why you're here, right? This reading is called On Compassion. We're doing these local service projects. Reflect back on why you're here and your intentions, right?
But as I say, I think as long as you give them some sense of pulling together the strands, they could do anything and they'll walk away with a sense of completion. What you don't want is to just, it's out of time.
Yeah, they said, we're here for each other. Just look at the name tags.
Yeah.
Without conversation, there's no progress.
Yeah. Without conversation, there's no progress.
Yeah.
There you go. That's why we do discussion-based learning.
Yeah, I think Dan says it best when he talks about his inspiration for coming here, just talking to different people. Because I think that's what I know it's not over yet, but I think that's what I will have gotten out of this program more than anything, because design thinking is cool. All the speakers we've had talk to us, it's amazing, it's an amazing opportunity, but really why we're all here is because of each other, right? The opportunity to be in a room, like just look at the name tags. Isn't that cool? Just look at that. So I think that's why we're all here.
Without conversation, there is no progress. And I think that's what we, especially with the Harknesses, we've been able to keep the conversation alive. And that's amazing because that means we're going to keep progressing.
Love Fest, you guys are awesome. All right, well done.
GCI introduces fellows to design thinking, a human-centered approach to problem solving that provides a framework to develop and execute impactful local service projects. And by global, we mean the ability to think globally but act locally to develop solutions in the fellows' home community. At the summit, students collaborate and work together in teams to focus on solutions to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is done through a one-day intensive workshop and field project at the summit where students learn the core principles and process of design thinking. Two of the most resonant aspects of design thinking within the GCI method are empathy and innovative thinking. Open minds are necessary to both unlock latent ideas and put yourself in another's shoes. The workshop begins with the how might we question. How might we educate youth? How might we alleviate poverty? The question continues to get honed and narrowed down to a defined audience for which students can identify practical and realistic solutions that they are capable of achieving through their local service projects. So what is the role of design thinking in forming a global leader? We believe the framework fosters better understanding of different perspectives, the ability to listen carefully, synthesize information, collaborate, and take action. No doubt you'll find connections to these themes in other parts of the GCI method. What follows are some short but poignant excerpts from the Summit Workshop Day that should serve to familiarize you with both design thinking and the steps we take to introduce fellows to it.
Whenever you're designing something, it turns out that the process that you go through, this interesting creative problem-solving methodology, can actually be harnessed and applied to lots of other fields, not necessarily only those traditionally associated with the field of design. So the phrase design thinking came up to refer to this way of thinking that designers use in order to go about their designing of stuff. And it turns out that no matter what you're doing or what profession you're in, you can use some tools from the design thinking methodology to create awesome, wonderful changes in the world. So that's why we today are going to think about using the design thinking methodology, something that came historically out of the field of design, and we're going to see how we can apply it to other non-designy topics. So then, jumping right in. First step of the design thinking process, empathize. Building empathy for the people that you're designing for. Designers like to say that you can't design anything for anyone until you take the time to understand the person that you're designing for. So we're going to start with just that. Luckily, a bunch of you guys have the better part of 2 decades of experience of building empathy for other people, and you know how to do this rather well, and we're going to do this today in conversation. So your first task is going to be to interview each other about your favorite food.
Chicken burger.
So I love pesto. Pesto pasta. So yeah, I got what kind of fries? Turkey fries? No.
What is the pasta look like? How it is? What are the ingredients?
All right.
So, eavesdropping on the fellows interviewing each other, you can overhear them describing their favorite foods and the aspects of these foods that they like. Julie loves pesto pasta, and Wunmi loves chicken burgers and curly fries. This is a good first step, but it's sort of limited to a superficial level. Design thinking requires deeper questions and also deeper context. So, we just had some lovely conversation. We talked to each other about our favorite food. Raise your hand if you actually heard some information pertaining to your partner's favorite food. Okay, good. Nobody was talking about other random stuff. Raise your hand if you know exactly what you're going to design now. So there was a couple troublemakers and overachievers that are just, for the rest of us, looks like the rest of the process still has something to give us. In order to think about how do you go forward from here, consider the following example analogy for a moment. Say I lived over here on the mainland, and I asked you, the designer, to build me a bridge that goes over here to an island. Mainland over there, island over here. I asked you to build me a bridge. What are some questions you need to get answered before you can get going on this thing? Yes? The depth of the water, right? That's important. Got to figure out how tall the piers need to be. Just shout them out. The budget, right? Like how we're building this thing out of straw or concrete. How far is it, right? Like the distance kind of matters a lot and relates to the budget. Yeah.
How many cars need to pass by?
How many cars, right? So how that's going to determine how wide it needs to be and the durability of the materials and everything. Yeah.
The weather in the area.
The weather, right? Like what kind of winds are we expecting here? Yeah, that's important.
What do you expect to use the bridge for? As in, are you transporting a lot of things by trucks, exporting things?
Right. Or like, are there trains? There's pedestrian traffic. Okay, great. So we can go down this road for a while. Okay, so say you asked me all those questions, and I answered them to your satisfaction. So now we know exactly how deep the water is, and here's the wind speed, and here's the height that the boats need to pass, and here's the durability, and here's the budget and timeline. And you heard all those things, and say it was $8 million and 2 years and whatever, and you built me the bridge. The first important thing to realize is you just did a good job. There's nothing wrong with what you just did. I asked you for a bridge, you gave me a bridge. It's a great, wonderful bridge. But what if, in the very beginning, before you started building the bridge, you asked me, hey, why do you need a bridge in the first place? And what if I told you, oh, it's because I need to get from the mainland to the island? Okay, at this point, your ideas in your head are probably multiplying, because how many other ways can I think of to get from the mainland to the island? Just shout them out. How can I get from the mainland to the island?
Ferry.
Boat, ferry, fly, swim, tunnel. What was over here? Jetpack?
A kayak.
Kayak. Underground road. Walking on water. Yeah, invent some cool water walking shoes. Okay, so here are two things to notice about what just happened. One, we seem to be having a lot more fun coming up with these ideas than when we were thinking about budgets, materials, and timelines. Number two is we, in fact, are now having a lot more really interesting, creative, and innovative ideas. So we're having more fun and we're coming up with better ideas, and the only thing we did to get here is ask a simple question, why? Okay, so that worked once. Let's try it again. Why do you need to get to the island in the first place? And what if I told you, oh, it's because I need to deliver this message? Okay. What other ideas can you now have for how I can deliver a message from the mainland to the island that may or may not involve any of those things? Carrier pigeon. So, message in a bottle. What? What'd you say? Email. Screaming out really loud.
Get Wi-Fi on the island.
Wi-Fi. Drones. Drum circle. Yeah. Smoke signals. Yeah, okay. Okay, so again, notice two things. One, we're having a lot more fun coming up with these interesting ideas. And 2, the ideas themselves are more creative, interesting, and innovative. And the only thing we did to get here is ask the simple question, why? So here's the third interesting thing to notice, besides it's more fun and the ideas are more creative. So we just spent $0 and 10 seconds of our life sending an email, which, as it turns out, fulfilled the same exact function that the bridge did, which cost us 2 years to build and $10 million. So not only is it the case that we're having more fun coming up with these ideas, not only is it the case that the ideas are more interesting and creative, but in fact, they are objectively more efficient, better use of resources, and probably better for the environment and the world. And the only thing we did is ask the simple question, why? So why is that the asking the question why really works? It turns out that as a designer, if you spend some time digging a little bit deeper behind the first several requests or responses that you get from the person for whom you're designing, and if you really bother to think about, hey, what can I learn about the needs, the desires, the motivations, the values of the person for whom I'm designing, turns out way more fun and way better ideas. So I'll give you another few minutes in conversation. See if you can find out any interesting, meaningful stories from your partner's life that relate to your favorite food, and see if you can design for that. Because people do this really interesting thing when they tell stories. Into these stories, we like to pack all kinds of really important insights about ourselves that we don't even know we're conveying. So, for example, if I told you, hey, this really annoying thing happened to me yesterday, immediately you know 2 things. You know what happened to me yesterday, right? And you also know something about what I find annoying, right? And that second thing is another separate, interesting, valid data point that clues you in a little bit about who I am as a person, helps you understand me better, and therefore design something for me that I will be more likely to love and use in my life.
It's pasta. It's pasta with a sauce, but the sauce just really brings back memories of when I went to Italy for the first time.
Oh, I see.
So when I went to Italy for the first time, and it really reminds me of like my grandma was a really good cook. So
already we can see that we're understanding why Julie loves pesto pasta so much. She's sharing stories now. There's an emotional connection that we can explore and ultimately account for in a design to enhance her pesto pasta eating experience. We're now moving to step number 2, which is define. Define is an opportunity to, well, define a specific challenge or opportunity that you want to work on. And this is really a moment in which you get to capture the findings that you made in your interview phases. The way this is going to work for us this morning is as a series of complete the sentence prompts. So if you want to flip to the next page in your handouts, what we have there is a series of complete the blank sentences. So starting at the top of the page, it's interesting or surprising or telling that they blank. One thing that seems to be interesting to them is blank. I wonder if this means blank. This stage really is just your moment to reflect, digest, analyze, think about what the information might mean. As soon as you're done with the top box on the page, you can move at your own pace to the bottom box on the page. And in this bottom box, we set up some how might we questions for ourselves. How might we questions are questions that designers ask ourselves in order to prepare for the idea generation step that's going to happen next. A good how might we question takes a specific problem or challenge or opportunity that you noticed in the experience that your partner has with their favorite food and asks how we can make it better. So when we asked, how might we deliver a message from the mainland to the island? That was a pretty nice how might we question because it was pretty specific, right? You know what topic we're talking about. And yet it was still open-ended enough that you can come up with lots of different answers, right? Carrier pigeons, smoke signals, whatever. All we want coming out of this step is just one nice how might we question. And I gave you room there to come up with 3 just so you can play with wording, try out different things. So all you want really is to get to one nice how might we question that you like. Overthinking it is one of the major pitfalls of the define step that can trip people up. To combat that, especially for the purpose of this exercise, I give them very little time to do it in, about 4 minutes. and just force them to unload their ideas on the page. Now then, that right there was the define step of the design thinking process, which leads you naturally into the ideate step of the design thinking process. Ideate just means come up with ideas. We couldn't fit the whole phrase into the hexagon, so we came up with one word for it. So this is the stage where you come up with ideas, and here's how we're going to do this today. Today, the way we're going to come up with ideas is by drawing them. It turns out that a large chunk of your brain, many, many neurons, are dedicated primarily to visual processing rather than verbal processing. So if you think visually, if you allow yourself to come up with ideas by drawing rather than by writing, you're just inviting those parts of the brain to join you in this creative problem-solving approach. So using your visual thinking in addition to your verbal thinking just helps you bring more of your mental horsepower to the challenge at hand. Push yourself with variety. It's okay if all 6 are bad. Take 4 minutes to do it. Take your Sharpie and have fun. In the workshop, we delve deeper into ideating strategies for success. But one of the biggest is to silence your self-criticism. When brainstorming, it's important to put even the bad ideas down on the sticky note because those lesser ideas could be the rungs on the ladder to better and better ones. An imaginative idea that might be outlandish, silly, unfeasible, or just plain weird could easily be the gateway to a far more innovative and effective idea that you would not have had originally.
Let's just do that.
Now, we're all just going to together admit and acknowledge that most of the ideas in the room right now are terrible. And that's fine. So let go of whatever embarrassment you have about that, because remember, the ideas that your partner is going to show you are equally terrible. So your job, when I give you a couple of minutes to share your ideas with your partner, is not to try to convince your partner about how awesome your ideas are, because remember, they're probably not. Instead, your job is to get feedback. Your job is to learn from your partner which ideas are working, why, which ideas are not working, why not. As you move forward in the design thinking process and iterate on those ideas and refine them, you want to know which are the most promising ones, which ones need to be smashed together into a new mega idea. So I'm not going to give you that much time, so as quickly as you can, just rattle through your ideas, point to the illustrations to help describe them, and then spend most of your time listening. The lessons of the previous steps shouldn't be forgotten when refining ideas, empathy being the big one. Interviewers still need to see from their interviewee's point of view, and not just forge ahead simply with the idea that they're most excited about. Now then, we move forward to the next step of the design thinking process, which is my personal favorite, prototype. Prototype is your chance to make your idea tangible. It is your chance to iterate, make a new revision, a new draft. And this time, rather than just sketching and keeping things in 2 dimensions, we're going to bring your ideas to life a little bit. So your task in the next little bit is going to be to make a physical, tangible representation of your idea that your partner can interact with. The goal in the prototype stage is to make something tangible and experiential to help further refine their idea with their partner. If the idea isn't an object, let's say it's an app, the student could draw a series of pictures to represent the interface. If it's something enormous like a restaurant, the student could focus on a small piece of it, like a menu or a table. By manipulating materials, students are forced to think with their hands as well.
Okay, so my favorite food is sushi and sashimi. So my partner came up with this thing. It's like a water bottle. It's insulated, so you can put the sashimi inside, so it'll stay cold, so you won't get food poisoning.
Very considerate.
Yeah. And it's like easy to clean, so you can like take it on the go. And
After building these prototypes, we had students share them with the class. In the real world, like when they tackle their local service projects, these steps will obviously take much longer and might involve revisiting previous steps as new information is learned. Eventually, the prototype step will lead to the test phase, where the fellow would test his or her best prototype with a user in the real world. In addition to the classroom workshop, we also gave them a challenge in the field to put their newfound skills to the test. The challenge was to come up with a solution to radically improve the public transportation experience in and around Harvard Square. A lot more is covered in the entire workshop, but these are the rudiments of design thinking that coalesce into other areas of the GCI method. Fellows then apply what they learn to their local service projects. For example, Tomas wanted to increase communication between distinct socioeconomic segments within Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He implemented a project called Musically United Students and Teachers, or MUST, where a group of students gather together and connect through music, culminating with a concert at the end of each school year. Another example is Karishma from Mombasa, Kenya. Karishma wanted to provide access to clean water to those in her community who lacked access. She created an affordable water filter for under $10, implemented it in her village, and has since filed a patent on her device.
Every day, our world becomes more digital and more globalized. Yet as we connect more than ever virtually, person-to-person interaction suffers. We are in some ways together alone. As humans, we are thirsty for meaningful interactions with one another. The heart of GCI is the opportunity to develop meaningful connections with one another and a sense of belonging to a welcoming global community where we embrace and respect each other. The Summit experience brings together people from all walks of life and all sectors of society to become lifelong agents of positive change. This multidimensional experience of academic, social connections, and self-reflection is truly transformative for many fellows. At the Summit, we encourage deeper connections outside of the classroom through activities including cohabitation, where fellows live with roommates and dine together, self-reflection journals to encourage introspective thought, an outward-bound team-building and bonding experience, and with inspirational speakers whose broad life experiences provide invaluable wisdom. In this final section of the video, Yumi Kuwana and GCI ambassadors Matt and Michelle sit down to discuss the unique impact of having international and multilingual students in the classroom and the extra dimension it adds. They also talk about life beyond the summit, including the GCI mentorship and ambassadorship. This third aspect of the GCI methodology, human connectivity, is crucial to developing a true global citizen because it creates bonds that transcend boundaries and last a lifetime.
So good afternoon, Matt and Michelle. It's so good to have you here today as our proud ambassadors. So let's just try to go back in time and see and just remember those days where you first arrived. And so please add some color about your residential experience with your cohort.
So the Irving House, where the GCI Summit takes place, was kind of like essentially the hub for me of connection between all the fellows. And I think it's very hard for cross-cultural competency to not develop, in my opinion, because it's a lot different communicating with different people from all over the world over the internet versus when you're actually living with them for 9 days. And so, especially between roommates, because if you're with someone from the other side of the world who has a completely different culture, then you're obviously going to have different living styles. So learning to make compromises and collaborate with your roommate on something as simple as living styles is very important. It's something that I think a lot of world leaders can learn from.
Michelle, can you shed light maybe to some of your residential experience?
I enjoyed staying at Irving House very much, and I felt like it was such an important experience for bonding with everyone. And having so many different cultures living together felt so important to really have these cultures in one place working together. And it was something I definitely loved, and my roommates I'm actually still in contact with, and I'm still very close friends with them.
And maybe share with me initially how you felt when you walked into the Irving House versus when you walked out.
I think definitely radically different experiences. So for me, going in knowing that I was going to be living with people that I didn't really know at all from a bunch of different, all walks of life, was something that I had to sort of not really come to terms with, but sort of like understand. And so walking into the Irving House, obviously there was some nerves that went along with that. And so, but just seeing people and like shaking their hands and getting to know them a little bit with the icebreakers, really very quickly knowing how all these people are incredibly nice, and they want to be there as well, really ingrained me within the culture of GCI. And by the time 9 days ended and I'm walking out of the Irving House, I didn't want to leave. Just like as Michelle said, I really didn't want to leave, and hugging everyone goodbye, writing gratitude cards, staying up late that night. So it's amazing what can happen in 9 days with people that don't know each other from all over the world. It's pretty cool, actually.
So now, part of it before we start the academic rigor is going to outdoor into nature and really working together for team building.
I felt like it was a really important introduction to the program because teamwork is about overcoming obstacles together and using each individual's contributions. And really putting that into our bodies on the first day was so important for keeping up that energy throughout the summit. Even though we weren't physically overcoming obstacles, we were still discussing issues and working together to build these projects. And so on the first day, overcoming that giant ladder together was such a great experience. And even though I was this small girl with 3 taller guys, and even then I still was a part of that team. And I felt like I belonged there, so.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
If you think about what happens later on the summit, fellows working together to solve sort of big global issues in their own local communities, you really need to have an introduction before that in order to develop bonds between one another, even if those are smaller. And so I think that's where the team building exercises outside really come in handy, because doing that allows you to develop trust. And with that trust, you can be more comfortable sharing ideas, whether it be in the discussions that we have or developing solutions that you want to implement in your local community.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point. Especially during the academic sessions, the more vulnerable we allow ourselves, the more learning takes place.
The more we can get out of it.
Yeah, so I think that we really valued that experience of being outdoors and leadership and team building.
Definitely. And then by the end of it, while we were getting into some of the more complicated tasks, as I would say, we sort of understood that this was meant to teach us to work together and listen to each other and be open-minded. And I think that the lessons that we learned from team building really echoed and carried out throughout the rest of the week and all the other activities that we did during the rest of the summit.
Yeah. I've definitely learned to pay attention to other people's needs, not only mine or the entire team's, but the fact that there are individuals within a team and paying attention to each of them as well as focusing on our initial goal is another important thing that I learned.
And I think it carries out throughout life as well.
Absolutely. No, that's such a good point. And throughout the program, we really emphasize the 3 E's of excellence, ethics, and engagement, plus leadership. Can you recall sort of the themes and personally the impact it's had on you?
So for me, I think the coolest part about the themes was how that the entire day sort of took one theme and it really carried over through the entire day. All the activities that we did revolved around one theme. So the one that I think that was most important and most powerful for me was ethics. And so I think what was cool, at least with the Harkness discussions, is how we discussed ethics in a bunch of different contexts. For example, ethics is really widely known as something revolving around technology, and we discussed how new technological innovations are very cool and very powerful tools, but also go along with ethical dilemmas. And one of the things we went over was military drones and new age technology in the military and how that can present an ethical dilemma. So I think that just having a theme throughout the day and sort of emphasizing it and not sort of teaching the theme directly, but having the material cover one theme and having it not just be science and technology, but also literature, poetry. I think it really makes for an all-encompassing day, and it gives you a bunch of different perspectives on the theme of ethics, engagement, and excellence.
At my school, I'd never really experienced topics like these before, and it was so unique and refreshing to go over topics about leadership in this way, and discussing it with others who've had completely different experiences was so wonderful. And I really found that our discussion tables with so many different ideas coming to the table really changed the definition of how I saw these words. For example, when it came to the day of excellence, before I thought of excellence as a state of being better than others, but when I learned at our discussion tables excellence is a lot more about constant progress and being in the state of improving and overcoming limitations. And I feel that engagement is really what makes these projects and ideas work. Just like how when we have design thinking, it's about how we find projects that are tailored to the audience, which is engaging with the audience. And engagement is incredibly important, and you're creating a healthy relationship between the change maker and those who benefit from it.
And if I can add on to that, I think, being an ambassador now, I can really fully see why GCI chose engagement, ethics, and excellence as some of these building blocks for the summit. And that's because to be a global citizen, it requires you to be excellent, it requires you to be engaged, and it requires you to be very ethical.
Absolutely. That's what we strive for. As you can see in this world and day and age where we're really have some challenges in terms of ethical leadership, we hope that you carry the core ethics, having a moral compass as you make your contributions in the world as an ethical global leader. GCI really focuses on the 5 C's and developing and nurturing the 5 C's as a global citizen. And those include character, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. How have you felt that your 5 C's were developed throughout the program?
So what I really liked about the way the 5 C's were taught is the way that they were weaved in sort of indirectly over the course of the summit. So it wasn't like we were being taught directly how to be a good critical thinker or how to be a good collaborator. It was the activities we were doing. Those are what taught us sort of critical thinking and collaboration. And then the next aspect that I think is really cool about it is how it does, like sometimes with those activities and it being taught indirectly, it can kind of slip past you how you're learning critical thinking and collaboration. So each morning we do reflections on how the day before taught us collaboration and critical thinking or the rest of the 5 C's. And having those reflections is a good chance for the fellows to reflect and see how they learned and how they developed their own 5 C's over the course of the day and then at the end over the course of the summit.
And I really feel that having these 5 C's embedded into the summit was reinforcing the underlying principles of the GCI method and adding these specific values to it. And I felt like centering in on these things really brings out a stronger leader and a stronger community.
Absolutely. Those are really the skills that you need as a global leader. So our program is really carefully curated. So in the morning you have reflections, afternoon are discussion-based learning, projects that take place in the afternoon, time to really have one-to-one time with your peers as well as teachers and the whole human connectivity. And the evening is all about inspirational speakers and how they can inspire you. Many of them are thought leaders in their industry, and we try to get different industries to add a lot of richness to the whole experience. Can you share with me your personal experience of perhaps an inspirational speaker that you enjoyed and some of your thoughts?
I think definitely hearing the motivation and stories from others who've accomplished so much adds so much more value and often want to learn something new. For example, with Jack Meyer's discussion, he really brought into the perspective of looking for a root cause before jumping to solve all the small issues, when all of these issues could actually be connected to one specific root cause which would solve many more problems.
Absolutely, that's a great way of looking at it. Throughout the academic session, we use the discussion-based pedagogy. And how do you see this related to human connectivity?
Discussion-based learning was interesting to me because it's everyone listening to each other and everyone has a voice at that table, instead of how in some classrooms you'll all be listening to one voice. And I feel like that really does help us connect with each other and hear more about each other's perspectives.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that another way of looking at it is the chemical reaction that happens with the 14 individuals is very powerful. And also the way Linda Hill describes it is that we all have a slice of genius and collectively together we become a collective genius. So it becomes more powerful.
And similarly, when it comes to connecting with others by hearing and listening to their voices, it reminded me of design thinking. Because when it comes to design thinking, the first question is, how might we? And it helps a community. So we're really listening to the voices of our communities in order to help them. And I felt like that was engaging and really carried out.
And to add on to that, I think with design thinking, the solution that you're trying to develop is tailored to your audience rather than being more about the designer itself. And so that's what the value of design thinking comes, because ultimately you want to solve the problem for the victim of the problem, for those suffering from the problem. So hearing from them first, empathizing with your audience before you go on and try to solve the problem is the most important part of any problem-solving process.
Absolutely. I think empathy, as you said, is so critical, and that's all about human connectivity, isn't it? Yeah. As you know, design thinking is a human-centric problem-solving mechanism that assists us in figuring out the sustainable development goals that you focus on. So we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and figure out a cause that really resonates with you, and you hone in on that issue and really think globally but act locally to solve this. It would be wonderful to learn about your specific local service project and how human connectivity has assisted in you achieving or helping to solve that problem.
With my personal project, I chose to focus on the problem of climate change. And so what I really found in my community is that there was a lack of awareness because we are all short-term thinkers and we weren't really thinking about long-term issues. And in my opinion, I had felt that climate change was the greatest threat to international security in the long term. And so and I thought the first step to sort of developing innovative solutions to it is to raise awareness and bring it to the front of people's minds. And so, so I developed a club and a group that was devoted to raising awareness for climate change in a bunch of different methods, which included presentations, running events for different holidays around the environment, as well as conducting polls about different environmental aspects of the King community.
Great. And I feel like the Sustainable Development Goals are a great guideline for fellows to find where there are problems and where problems can be solved. For example, with mine tackling quality education, my project addressed how creative education isn't very emphasized in my community. And so to address that, we created an event that would celebrate the creative minds in my community. And now it's an annual event at my school, which is really great to see.
That's right. What is your event called?
So my school's name is Hobby School, and we've called it Hobbies Got Talent, in which anyone from the school can participate, whether it's teachers, students, staff, or anyone really.
What a powerful project. That's great. So in order to become a better leader, part of one element that's really important is to self-reflection, to get to know oneself. Once you have the ability to get to know oneself, then you get to know others better. So we have a woven-in program in the morning before classes start of self-reflection, journal writing, and so forth. How did you find that exercise?
In general, reflection is important, and to look back and to see what you've learned and observed is so important. And I feel like it helps the most resonant lessons really stick with you once you've put it in your own words and perspective.
Absolutely.
And I think when solving any problem, you always need to set aside time to reflect whether you failed or whether you've been successful. Understanding why things happened, why you were successful or why you failed is very important to your development as a leader and your development as a person.
Absolutely. I think everybody really needs that space and time to digest what happened or what you want to do, because the world is so interconnected and digitized that we rarely have time to even breathe. So having the space to self-reflect and digest what just happened or what is about to happen, I think just makes you a better person, makes you a better leader, and makes you a better critical thinker. Before the summit, you are connected to a professional person who becomes your mentor. And then after the summit, you work together and they help guide you in terms of implementing your projects. How was your personal experience regarding mentorship?
So my mentor was a very valuable resource for me as I went about my fellowship during the 9 months, and he frequently gave me advice on how to go about the next step of my project, and if I was ever stuck, I would reach out, and he would give me advice on next steps to take. And beyond just the local service project, my mentor has been really a good person to just reach out to for advice in any aspect of life, whether it be college or whether it be the future and what job I want to go into and what field I want to go into. And it's very convenient because he is in a field that I'm very interested in. And so reaching out to him, given that we have common interests, it has allowed us to connect even more and allowed him to be even more valuable to me.
And I feel that some students may forget that they can reach out to help and they can seek out a team if they need to. And so giving them a mentor to reach out to from the beginning really teaches them that if they need help, they can find it.
That's an important message. And actually, because all of you, the 28 that arrived to the Irving House, are high-achieving, well-accomplished leaders, one thing that I've noticed is the ability to ask for help. They're not used to asking for help. So I think that having a mentor or learning how to ask for help, I think, is also an important lesson.
It's a key skill.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So what does it mean to be a GCI ambassador?
Being a GCI ambassador means being a part of this lifelong community where you can always reach out to for support. And it's really just a giant group of leaders for positive change. And that feels like such an important and big role to take on. And there's a lot of responsibility, but there's also a lot of support with it.
For me personally, after going through the GCI Summit and as well as a fellowship and becoming a newly minted ambassador, I've really truly begun to get behind 100% the GCI method. And with that, I've undergone a process to integrate the GCI method within my school and sort of create the butterfly effect and being an agent for change, not just among GCI, but in my local community as well. And I hope that more people from my school can continue to attend the GCI Summit, as well as teachers attending the PD seminar and taking what they learned back to my community and spreading the wealth of knowledge and creating more global citizens.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point, Matt, that we have the fellowship, we have the professional development program, and the multiplier effect that happens from that is very powerful. But also our desire is to spread the GCI curriculum to many schools and many institutions so that we can share and collaborate.
And just to add on, before the GCI Summit, I really felt like global citizenship was this sort of utopian society that we couldn't really ever reach, but could sort of approach asymptotically, because being a global citizen is just about being a citizen of the world and sort of abandoning your preconceived notions about others. And then after the GCI Summit, I truly believe that we can become a global citizenship, and the way to do that is through dialogue, it's through communication and collaboration, and that's very valuable. What the GCI Summit taught me about global citizenship is very valuable, and it's something that I'll continually take back with me to my community.
Which really brings it back to human connectivity, because I feel that being a global citizen and being globally minded is embracing diversity, and I feel that is important to do in order to eradicate the boundaries that are created by the fear of diversity. And once we can get through that, we really can create stronger connections and more positive change.
Absolutely, and I think better understanding on the human-to-human level is really critical. For example, now that you know a friend from Afghanistan, you're not going to think Afghanistan Taliban, you're going to think Afghanistan Aziza. If you think about Mongolia, you won't think about pollution, you'll think about Mongolia, Michelle, my friend. So I think that's really important to have that human-to-human interaction and actually have a friend there. I wanted to thank you both for being here today. I think it's really important that we have this conversation about global citizenry and your personal experience, and really it's been meaningful for you to share and shed light to us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yumi.
Thank you.
After the summit concludes, fellows are empowered to bring their learnings back to their local communities and engage with peers to launch their social endeavors. Mentors are accessible to provide guidance and support beyond the Global Service Project itself. GCI connects ambassadors to opportunities for seed funding, internships, and enriching educational programs through its ever-growing network of collaborative partners. The community also stays connected, engaged through GoGCI, a customized online platform. After Fellows Local Service projects conclude, they will forever be ambassadors and members of GCI's growing ecosystem of global citizens and leaders. We continue to have small and large reunions all over the world as our GCI family continues to expand. We hope you found this video enlightening. If you're interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.